my fellow Croms. Long time no see. I am here with you today to talk about part 3 of The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. This is all a part, probably a very long tail part of Jason at Old Blue's Chapter and Verse hosting the Cromwellathon, where we are reading the Thomas Cromwell novels of Hilary Mantel. And this, The Mirror and the Light, is the final thumper in that. The first two being Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. I got the names, oh boy. It's been a while. There's been the coronavirus, and there's been a lot of falling off. I read part 3, and I'll get into it at the very end, but I paused. I did a very much definite pause, but I've decided, okay, I'm going to make a video on part 3, and then we're going to forge ahead. Or I'm going to forge ahead. I think everyone else probably just finished the novel, and that was it. Or are off on their own journeys. So yes, I'm going to talk about part 3 today. If this is for some reason a video that you're just jumping into, I'm talking about the middle of the book. Spoilers ahead. You probably you go over to Jason at Old Blue's Chapter and Verse and listen to him talk about the various novels. This is probably just for the wonks out there, the Thomas Cromwell wonks. So with me pushing as many of you away as possible, let us begin. So yes, this is part 3, divided into 3 parts. The first part being the bleach fields, where Cromwell's suddenly confronted with a daughter that was unknown to him, Jenica from Anselma in Antwerp, and a past life, and he's this full-grown daughter that he gets to know, and she brings stories of Tyndale's death, the translator of the Bible, who has eventually finally been hunted down, probably pushed on by Thomas More, even from beyond the grave, and caught and killed. Part 2 is the Image of the King, which is a lot about like the portrait of making kind of this big grand portrait of Henry VIII. By Hans Holbein. And actually, I'll put a link down below, because I actually just listened to In Our Times, a really great BBC show, actually talking about Hans Holbein, and actually even talking about this lost masterpiece of his, because it was painted in Whitehall for the Privy Chamber, this very dramatic face-on picture of Henry, but it was consumed in a fire, so we only have sort of reports of it as far as I know. Also in this section, we get him marrying his son Gregory off to Bess Seymour, so a sister of Jane Seymour, so it's relating the families together. But there's a comedic point in there where there's a bit of confusion of Bess Seymour, and I think her father kind of assumed that it's actually Cromwell who wants to marry Bess, and that is very awkward, both comedic and both also sort of emblematic of how much Cromwell sticks into the lives of the families around him. And indeed, Gregory at a certain point just sort of says, "Please stay away from my wife," which you can see. It's definitely a part of this whole thing of we're getting all this from Cromwell's point of view. And so you see Cromwell as he sees himself, as in a mirror, but you can see that a lot of other people see a very different, much more imposing, much more a powerful figure than he does himself, which I guess is understandable. And section 3, Broken on the Body, which is Jane Seymour giving birth to Edward, to the what's going to be a short-lived Edward, and dying from complications of childbirth. So those are the 3 sections. Probably I'm going to start out with I'm going to do a couple of little quotes. I'll not start out. I'm just going to do a couple of little quotes, discuss those, and then I will let those of you who are brave enough to go. The first one is actually him reflecting on Tyndale, and thinking that he imagines him sort of at the end days, like rising in like an armor of lights, and all the broken and burned men and women remaking themselves. And then, he kind of recounts those people. And says, in those blessed days, the whole of creation will shine. But till then, we see through a glass darkly, not face to face, which is a kind of a rephrasing of Corinthians. For now we see in a mirror darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, just as I also am known. So that interesting of like, then the part that isn't in Cromwell's thing is like, now I know in part, but then I shall know, just as I am also known. So it's like Cromwell doesn't have perfect knowledge of himself, but maybe at the end he will actually have knowledge of how he is known. And he goes on, somewhere or nowhere perhaps there is a society ruled by philosophers. They have clean hands and pure hearts, but even in the metropolis of light there are middens and manure heaps swarming with flies. Even in the republic of virtue you will need a man who will shovel up the shit, and somewhere it is written that Cromwell is his name, which somewhere or nowhere perhaps, which is got to be it's an allusion to Thomas More, his arch rival's famous work Utopia, which is no place. So it's like you imagine a perfect world, but Cromwell is the practical man in all this, and he knows that he will be the one who has to shovel up the shit. The other phrase that actually stuck out to me is the Republic of Virtue, which it's like, where have I heard of that before? And there is a Republic of Virtue, but it's an anachronism as far as I know. The Republic of Virtue is a thing that Robespierre talked about. A Republic of Virtue and the necessity for terror to institute that. We're going to use terror as a state tool to get to that state. You have to use terror, and it's a justification. Indeed, in the reign of terror in the French Revolution, that's what it was used. And why would someone like Hilary Mantel might have something like that in there? She wrote a book, which I haven't read yet, but is A Place of Greater Safety, which is about the French Revolution. So Mantel might indeed be thinking about that. So it is interesting that out of the mouth of this character who sees himself sympathetically, we have the Republic of Virtue and the necessity for a man who will shovel up the shit. And somewhere it is written that man's name is that Cromwell is his name, which is, it's like that you get that little, you always get that kind of, it's like Cromwell sees himself as essentially a good person, but you get those glimpses through of a darker fellow. I mean, while also getting the humanity, but also that kind of that darkness in there. I think I'll skip over that. But the thing I love about this book is I could almost see this as a play where you just have Cromwell sitting up at night, because there's so much of this is him sitting up at night and reflecting back at, I guess it would make an incredibly bad stage play. This is why I'm not a playwright. But there's this part in part 2 of him kind of having a sleepless night yet again. He's always having sleepless nights. Like there's something for him, stuff that is troubling him, is nagging him, is worrying him. Of after being inducted into the Garter, kind of like this great achievement in his thing, and him trying to like figure out how to kind of deal with success in a lot of ways. It's like, I'm not prepared for success. He talks about like, I'm prepared for adversity, but I'm not prepared for succeeding. And it's like, it's like that's going to be his downfall in a way, of the cockiness, the getting so comfortable in this. And it's like furiously he wills himself into sleep, but he is tired of trying to wake up different. In stories there are folk who, observed at dawn or dusk in some open watery space, are seen to flit and twist in the air like spirits, or fledge leather wings through their flesh. Yet he is no such wizard. He is not a snake who can slip his skin. He is what the mirror makes when it assembles him each day. Jolly Tom from Putney, unless you have a better idea. which, I mean, it's interesting. You have him like it's like you get this demon thing of like leather wings coming out, or as a snake in there. But there is that thing of like what the mirror makes him. It's like it's his own reflection in this novel that is making Thomas Cromwell, the picture that we have. But that's like if you're going to take it on face value, unless the reader has better ideas. And Hilary Mantel is always poking you, going, "Do you have a better idea? Do you have a better idea?" Which is what I love. Which is what I love about this book. It's like it's amazing how much she is able to kind of inject of ambiguity, of complexity of Cromwell, of the dark shadings of this man within a something that's coming out of his own reflections. So that this is why I'm loving I really love these books. I think is just that lovely interplay. And it's like Jane is given birth in this section, which feels like it's like the end of a novel to me. It's like Jane gives birth and the rewards are handed out, but Cromwell is forgotten. Cromwell remains Cromwell. And he thinks it's because, like, he didn't succeed in having Reginald Pole, threat to Henry's reign, killed. But there's also, you wonder if it's a part of, like, well, if he gets an heir and it's like the realm gets stable, it's like we're not going to really need Cromwell anymore. It's like this could be like Jane Seymour gave birth and Cromwell got shuffled off, or, maybe got executed or whatever here. It's like, he isn't needed anymore. He's a necessary creature to Henry. I mean, there's a part in here where Cromwell imagines he and the king's bodies kind of intermingling in the night, and their bodies intertwine, and what drips out is the ink on the page of, like, the laws that they craft together, that Cromwell maybe shapes as he's helping Henry craft them. But then the king wakes up and he forgets who Cromwell is. He forgets that he made him, and there's sort of this implication that, yes, Cromwell, foreshadowing, Cromwell is going to be forgotten. He's going to be cast aside. That he made him, but he'll forget about him and forget his use. But the thing that, of course, that does happen here is Jane dies, and Cromwell's angry about the death, and it's like, oh, if I had married her, it's like, well, she would have never died because I would have handled things better. But there's also Call Me Rossley says to him, like, oh, well, maybe you're just angry because you should have held off on the marriage until everything was A-okay, because now you've got kind of a lesser marriage, you've got a lesser relation to this prince, where you could have had a better shot. And, like, they dismiss him as being kind of like, oh, he's angry because of death of his own son. But you do wonder, it's like there's that calculation in there that's always there with Cromwell, which Cromwell both always does, but also has hard time acknowledging it. And indeed, at the end, like, there's this thing where Bess, formerly Seymour, now married to Gregory, says, "But I would rather be alive," Bess says, "than have a great name. Would not you, Lord Cromwell?" Which is funny. He says, "Would not you, Lord Cromwell?" It's like, yes, you have a great name, and you are on this knife's edge to have this name. You could die at any second, but you have a great name. You have a great name. You're rising your family up, but you could die at any second. And it's like, well, that's the thing. He's obviously willing to throw those dice, to put himself in great danger in this world, to play the stakes in hopes of getting the great name. And then I got to the end of the section and I was just like, I feel like, okay, we're going to start all over again, because indeed the last line of this is his son saying, "My Lord Father, who will you let the king marry next?" It's like, oh God, we're going to start over again, which is when I went, okay, I'm going to pause. There's all this stuff happening in the world. I'm super stressed. So I said, okay, I'm going to put it down, let it marinate. And then I'm going to go back, because we've got like part 4 to 6, which is like 523 to 878. I feel like this is going to be the next novel, and I needed to take a breath to kind of run up to it. Not so much of a breath that I forgot about it. That's why it's good to actually chat about it here. but it's like, okay, I'm going to take the run up to it now. So if you too have paused, why not start up again and take a run at that those last parts there, part 4 to part 6. That's my plan. What's your plan, if you have a plan, or how did the whole reading go? If you have finished the novel many months ago and you're trying to cast your mind back to what the hell happened, it's like, did this jog any memories? Do you have spoilers probably for me for what's happening next? I know it doesn't end well for Cromwell. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. As always, I give my sheepish laugh at the end of all these silly videos. All right, more videos later.